The sun shines over the quiet suburban neighborhood, casting long shadows from the neatly trimmed hedges lining the sidewalks. Birds chirp lazily in the trees and children laugh in the distance, their voices blending with the occasional hum of passing cars. 17-year-old Marcus walks down the street, hands in his pockets, earbuds in, nodding slightly to the beat of his favorite song. His dark curls bounce as he steps lightly over the pavement, his basketball tucked under one arm. He's headed to the park, where he plans to shoot some hoops before heading home to finish a summer assignment for school. As he passes by a row of houses, he notices a woman standing on her porch, staring at him. He barely pays her any mind at first, he's used to the looks. But something about the way she's watching him makes the back of his neck prickle. He keeps walking, focusing on his music. Then he hears her voice. "Hey, what are you doing here?" Marcus slows, turns slightly. The woman, mid-40s, blonde, with an expensive-looking yoga outfit, has stepped off her porch and onto the sidewalk. Her eyes narrow. "Excuse me?" Marcus asks, pulling out one of his earbuds. She folds her arms, taking another step closer. "You don't belong here." Marcus blinks. "I live around the corner." She scoffs. "Oh really? What's your address?" Marcus frowns. "Why do I need to tell you that?" The woman's lips press into a thin line. She pulls out her phone. "That's it," she says. "I'm calling the police." Marcus's stomach tightens. He's heard stories, too many stories. He knows how these situations can go. He glances around. There are no witnesses nearby, just the sound of a sprinkler hissing on a lawn. "I'm literally just walking to the park," he says, keeping his voice calm. "Sure you are," she snaps. "You people always have an excuse." His jaw clenches. "You don't live here. I don't recognize you. And you were looking at my house." Marcus almost laughs. "Looking at your house? Lady, I'm just walking by." Her thumb presses against the screen of her phone. "Hello, yes, I'd like to report a suspicious person in my neighborhood," she says, her voice dripping with fake distress. "Yes, he's a young black male, wearing a hoodie, carrying something under his arm." Marcus shakes his head in disbelief. "It's a basketball." She doesn't acknowledge him. "Yes, I feel threatened. Please hurry." Marcus feels his hands shaking. He clenches them into fists, breathing deeply. "Stay calm, stay calm." Then, from down the street, a sleek black car pulls up. The woman stiffens, watching as the driver steps out. A tall woman, powerful, elegant, wearing a fitted navy blue blazer and heels that click against the pavement, strides toward them with an unmistakable air of authority. Marcus exhales in relief. His mother. Dr. Elaine Carter. A name that rings in boardrooms, courtrooms, and news headlines. She's not just anyone, she's one of the most respected civil rights attorneys in the state. A woman who has fought, and won, cases against people just like the one standing in front of her son. Her gaze sweeps over the scene. She takes in the phone in the woman's hand, the expression on Marcus's face, the tension in his shoulders. "What's going on here?" Her voice is calm, but there's an edge to it, a sharpness that cuts through the air. The woman hesitates. This boy was loitering in our neighborhood. I was just." "He's my son," Dr. Carter interrupts smoothly. The woman's mouth opens, then closes. Dr. Carter steps closer, her eyes locked onto the woman's like a laser. "My son," she repeats, emphasizing each word. I didn't know," the woman stammers. "I was just calling the police on a teenager walking to the park?" Dr. Carter's voice remains even, but her words carry weight. The woman glances between Marcus and his mother, her confidence cracking. "I was just trying to be cautious." Dr. Carter folds her arms. "Cautious of what, exactly?" The woman swallows. I just thought." Dr. Carter tilts her head. "You thought what?" The woman falters. I didn't mean any harm." Dr. Carter lets out a slow breath, then pulls out her own phone. "Good," she says. "Then you won't mind if I call the police and let them know that you made a false report. That you racially profiled my son." The woman's face drains of color. "Wait, there's no need for that." Dr. Carter raises an eyebrow. "Oh, I think there is," she says. "Because this is exactly why so many innocent black men and boys end up in dangerous situations. Because of assumptions. Because of people like you, who think they have the right to decide who belongs where." The woman opens her mouth to argue, but nothing comes out. Dr. Carter glances at Marcus. "Are you okay?" He nods, but she sees the tension in his jaw. Dr. Carter turns back to the woman. "You should think very carefully before ever doing something like this again," she says. "Next time, You might find yourself on the receiving end of a very public lawsuit. The woman flinches. But Dr. Carter is already turning, placing a hand on Marcus's shoulder and guiding him toward the car. Come on, baby, she says. Let's go home. As they pull away, Marcus glances out the window. The woman is still standing there, phone clutched in her hand, her face pale, frozen in place. And for the first time in his life, Marcus feels something unexpected. Not fear. Not frustration. Power. Because for once, the person who tried to make him feel small was the one left speechless. As they drive away, silence settles in the car. Marcus stares out the window, watching the houses blur past. His hands are still clenched, his heart still pounding. The rush of adrenaline hasn't faded yet. He knows he should feel safe now. His mother always makes him feel safe, but something lingers. Something heavy. His mother notices. Talk to me, she says, her voice softer now. Marcus swallows. He doesn't want to admit how much it affected him. How, for a moment, when the woman was on the phone with the police, he imagined the worst. He's heard the stories, too many stories. He's seen the videos, read the headlines. He knows how quickly things can escalate. I didn't do anything wrong, he finally says. His mother's hands tighten around the wheel. I know, she says. You never should have been put in that position. Marcus shakes his head. But I was. And she didn't even hesitate. The second she saw me, she assumed I was a threat. His mother sighs. She's fought cases just like this one. She stood in front of judges, in front of juries, in front of crowds demanding justice. But when it's her own son, her own flesh and blood, it feels different. She pulls the car into their driveway and turns off the engine. But neither of them move to get out. Baby, she says, turning to look at him, there are always going to be people like her. People who see you and don't see a young man. They see their own fear, their own prejudice. And they act on it without thinking about the consequences. Marcus exhales sharply. Yeah. And what if the cops had shown up before you did? His mother doesn't answer right away. She doesn't need to. They both know what could have happened. She reaches over and takes his hand. That's why we fight, she says. That's why I do what I do. And why you have to be smarter, stronger. Because they expect you to lose control. They expect you to give them a reason to be afraid. Marcus stares at the dashboard. But I didn't lose control. And she still called the cops. His mother nods. That's why we make sure people like her don't get to do this without consequences. Marcus looks up at her, confused. What do you mean? A slow, knowing smile spreads across her face. I'm going to make sure she never forgets today, she says. The next morning, the story is everywhere. Marcus wakes up to the sound of his phone buzzing repeatedly on his nightstand. He groggily reaches for it and sees dozens of notifications. Texts, missed calls, social media alerts. His heart skips a beat as he opens one of the messages from his best friend, Jamal. Yo, your mom is a legend. Confused, Marcus sits up and clicks on the link Jamal sent him. It's a news article. Civil rights attorney confronts woman who called police on black teen, exposes racial profiling. Marcus's mouth drops open. He scrolls through the article, reading in disbelief. Apparently, his mother had wasted no time. That same evening, she'd reached out to a journalist she knew, provided details of the encounter, and ensured that the incident was documented. And because the woman's 911 call was a public record, she had obtained a copy. Marcus clicks on the video attached to the article. His mother stands in front of a news camera, her expression calm but fierce. This is what racial profiling looks like, she says. This is what happens when people let their biases dictate their actions. My son was walking to the park. That's it. But in her mind, that was enough reason to call the police. The camera cuts to the 911 call, where the woman's trembling voice falsely describes Marcus as a possible burglar. Then it switches back to his mother. How many times do we have to hear these stories before something changes? She continues. How many innocent black boys and men have to be put in danger before we hold people accountable? The video ends, but Marcus's phone keeps buzzing. The woman's name, Karen Simmons, was trending on social media. People had identified her, found her social media accounts, even discovered that she was part of the local homeowners association. And the backlash was brutal. Marcus swipes through the comments. Another Karen caught in 4K. She needs to be fired from whatever job she has. You called the cops on a kid? And you thought people wouldn't find out. Shout out to Marcus's mom. We need more people like her. Marcus is still reading when his mother knocks on the door and peeks her head in. Morning, baby, she says. Sleep okay? He looks up at her, shaking his head in disbelief. Mom, Did you really go to the news? She smiles. I told you I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Marcus exhales, rubbing his face. Now everyone knows about it. That's the point, she says, sitting on the edge of his bed. She thought she could do this in silence. That no one would care. That it would just be another forgotten incident. I made sure that didn't happen. Marcus thinks about that. About how, for the first time, the world wasn't just hearing about something like this happening, they were actually seeing consequences. And then there's another notification on his phone. A public statement from Karen Simmons. Marcus's mother sees it too. They both click the link at the same time. A video plays. Karen sits in front of a camera, her eyes red-rimmed, her hands wringing together. I want to sincerely apologize to Marcus Carter and his family, she says, her voice shaking. I let my fears cloud my judgment and I made a terrible mistake. I should never have called the police. I was wrong. Marcus scoffs. She's only saying this because people are dragging her. His mother tilts her head. Maybe. But now she knows what it feels like to be judged unfairly. Marcus thinks about that for a moment. About how, for once, the person who did the harm was the one feeling the weight of consequences. The world kept turning, but something was different now. For once, the victim didn't just have to walk away and accept it. For once, people saw the truth. For once, justice wasn't just a concept. It was real. And Marcus? He wasn't just another name in a statistic. He was proof that the world was watching. Marcus sat back, staring at the screen as the woman continued her apology. It was strange, watching her face, listening to her words. She looked nervous, regretful even, but Marcus wasn't sure how much of it was real. People like her always seemed to apologize when they got caught, when the weight of public shame became too much to bear. He wondered if she had lost her job yet, if she had been bombarded with messages from friends and family asking how she could do such a thing. He wondered if she had ever truly considered what might have happened if the police had shown up and assumed the worst. His mother exhaled beside him, watching the video with sharp eyes. She had seen countless apologies like this before. Public figures, police officers, ordinary citizens who had called the cops on black people for existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. Most of the time, the apologies meant nothing. They were just words meant to quiet the outrage, to make the story disappear so the person could go back to their life with as little consequence as possible. But this time was different. His mother had made sure of that. The pressure on Karen Simmons wasn't just coming from social media, it was coming from the real world. News outlets had picked up the story. Civil rights groups were calling for action. The homeowners association she was a part of had released a statement condemning her actions. Even her employer had been forced to respond to the flood of complaints demanding they take a stance. Marcus scrolled through the comments beneath her apology video. Some people were sympathetic, saying she had learned her lesson. Others weren't buying it. If she wasn't caught, she wouldn't be sorry. She could have gotten this kid killed. A public apology isn't enough. No sympathy. She deserves whatever happens. Marcus wasn't sure how he felt. He wasn't the type of person to revel in someone else's downfall, even when they had done something horrible. But he also couldn't forget the way he had felt in that moment, standing there watching her call the cops, knowing that his entire future could have been destroyed by a lie. He put his phone down and looked at his mother. Do you think she actually means it? His mother didn't answer right away. Instead, she closed her eyes for a moment, like she was weighing something in her mind. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, measured. I think she means it right now, she said. But real change doesn't happen overnight. It's easy to be sorry when the world is watching. What matters is what she does when no one is looking. Marcus nodded slowly. That made sense. Anyone could apologize when they were backed into a corner. But would she be different tomorrow? A week from now? A year from now? Would she speak up the next time she saw someone else being treated unfairly? Or would she stay silent, hoping to avoid controversy? A sudden knock at the front door pulled Marcus out of his thoughts. He frowned, glancing at his mother, who immediately tensed. It was early, too early for visitors. She stood up, moving cautiously toward the door while Marcus followed close behind. When she opened it, they were both surprised to see Karen Simmons standing there. She looked different in person, smaller somehow. Her shoulders were hunched, her face pale, her eyes filled with something that almost looked like shame. She clutched her hands together in front of her, shifting awkwardly as she met Marcus's mother's gaze. I hope it's okay that I came, she stammered. I wanted to apologize in person. Marcus's mother didn't step aside, didn't invite her in. She simply raised an eyebrow. You already apologized on camera. Karen swallowed. I know. But that wasn't enough. She turned to Marcus then, her gaze softening. I put you in danger. I know that now. And I hate myself for it. Marcus felt something twist in his chest. He had spent the last 24 hours filled with anger, frustration, confusion. He had replayed the moment over and over in his head, trying to understand how someone could see him, just a kid walking to the park, and decide he was a threat. And now here she was, standing on his doorstep, looking fragile and broken. His mother crossed her arms. And what exactly do you want from us? Karen hesitated. Nothing. I don't expect forgiveness. I need you to know that I've learned from this. That I'm not going to be that person anymore. Marcus studied her. He wanted to believe her. But belief was a fragile thing and trust was even more fragile. His mother, as always, was sharp. You don't get points for realizing racism is wrong after the fact. Karen flinched. I know. I deserve everything that's happening to me. Marcus's mother tilted her head slightly. And what are you going to do about it? Karen blinked. Do. Anyone can say they're sorry, his mother said. But what are you actually going to do to make things better? Are you going to donate to civil rights organizations? Educate yourself on racial bias? Speak up the next time you see someone being treated unfairly? Or are you just going to disappear and hope people forget? Karen's eyes filled with tears. I want to do better. His mother studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded once. Then do better. Karen exhaled, looking both relieved and overwhelmed. She turned to Marcus again. I know I don't deserve it, but I hope one day you can forgive me. Marcus didn't respond right away. Forgiveness wasn't something that could be given on command. It had to be earned. Maybe one day, he said finally. But not today. Karen nodded. I understand. And with that, she turned and walked away. Marcus watched her go, feeling lighter. Not because she had apologized. Not because he had forgiven her. But because, for the first time, the weight of what had happened didn't feel like his to carry alone. His mother placed a hand on his shoulder. You okay? He nodded. Yeah, I think so. She squeezed his shoulder gently. Come on. Let's have breakfast. As they walked back inside, Marcus realized something. This wasn't just about one woman's mistake. It wasn't just about one moment of injustice. It was about something bigger, about making people see, making them understand, making them change. And today, for the first time, it felt like maybe, just maybe, that change had begun. The days after Karen Simmons' visit felt strangely quiet. The storm that had erupted around her actions hadn't died down completely, but it had begun to shift. Some people were still calling for her to lose everything, her job, her home, her entire way of life. Others argued that she had learned her lesson, that she shouldn't be condemned forever for a mistake, no matter how dangerous it had been. Marcus stayed away from the online debates. He didn't want to get sucked into the cycle of endless arguments, the back and forth of people who had never been in his position, who couldn't possibly understand what it was like to feel the full weight of someone else's fear weaponized against you. His mother, however, was paying close attention. Every morning, she scrolled through the news articles, the social media posts, the opinion pieces being written about the situation. Some were supportive, acknowledging how dangerous it had been for Karen to assume the worst about Marcus. Others were less forgiving, pointing out that this wasn't an isolated incident, that it was part of a much larger pattern of people like Karen using the police as their personal enforcers against black people who made them uncomfortable. One article in particular caught his mother's attention. It was written by a journalist who had been following the case closely, someone who had reached out to Karen for an interview. The piece was brutally honest, breaking down how incidents like this weren't just about one bad decision but about a lifetime of ingrained biases, about the way society conditioned people to see black boys like Marcus as threats rather than kids just trying to live their lives. Marcus read the article twice, feeling an odd mixture of anger and relief. It was frustrating to see his life dissected like this, to have his experience turned into a think piece for people to debate over. But at the same time, it meant that people were paying attention. It meant that maybe, just maybe, things could change. Karen had disappeared from public view for a while after her visit, but eventually she resurfaced. Instead of retreating into silence, she started speaking out, attending community meetings, volunteering with organizations focused on racial justice, even participating in workshops designed to educate people about bias and privilege. Marcus didn't know how to feel about that. On one hand, it was good to see her taking responsibility. But on the other hand, it didn't erase what had happened. It didn't change the fact that she had looked at him and seen danger instead of a kid just walking through his own neighborhood. His mother, ever skeptical, kept her distance. People love a redemption story, she said one evening as she prepared dinner. But redemption isn't just about making yourself look better. It's about making real change. Marcus wasn't sure if Karen was truly changing or if she was just trying to save herself. Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe what mattered was that other people were learning from her mistake. The biggest shock came a few weeks later when Marcus and his mother received an invitation to an event at the local community center. It was a panel discussion on racial bias in suburban neighborhoods, featuring activists, scholars, and, surprisingly, Karen Simmons herself. Marcus hesitated before agreeing to go. He wasn't sure he wanted to see her again, to sit in a room and listen to her talk about what she had learned. But his mother convinced him. "We don't just walk away from these conversations," she said. "We make sure they're had the right way." The community center was packed when they arrived. News cameras lined the back of the room, capturing every moment. People whispered as Marcus and his mother took their seats near the front. He recognized a few neighbors, some of whom nodded at him in quiet support. Others looked uncomfortable, like they weren't sure how to acknowledge him after everything that had happened. The panel discussion started with experts talking about the history of racial profiling, about how neighborhoods like theirs had been built on unspoken rules about who belonged and who didn't. Then came the personal stories, Black residents sharing their experiences of being followed in stores, questioned by security, treated as outsiders in their own communities. And then it was Karen's turn. She sat with her hands clasped in her lap, her voice shaking slightly as she spoke. "I don't deserve sympathy," she began. "And I don't expect it. But I do want to be honest about how I ended up here." She described growing up in a world where she had never been forced to think about race, where she had been taught, sometimes explicitly, sometimes subtly, that certain people were dangerous, that certain neighborhoods weren't safe, that calling the police was always the right answer when she felt uncomfortable. "I didn't realize how much harm that way of thinking could cause," she said. "Not until I saw the look on Marcus's face that day. Not until I understood that my fear wasn't based on reality, it was based on everything I had been conditioned to believe." Marcus felt his chest tighten. He wanted to believe her. He really did. But words were easy. Actions were harder. The moderator asked Karen what she was doing to make amends. She talked about the work she had been doing, the uncomfortable conversations she had been having with her friends and family, the pushback she had faced from people who thought she was overcorrecting, who didn't understand why she was trying so hard to make up for one mistake. And then she turned to Marcus. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said. "I don't even know if I deserve it. But I do know that I owe you more than just an apology. I owe you action." The room was silent, all eyes on Marcus. He felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the expectation that he would say something profound, something that would tie everything together. But all he could think about was how tired he was. Tired of being put in these situations. Tired of having to be the one who decided whether someone deserved grace or condemnation. Tired of carrying the burden of proving his own humanity to people who should have seen it in the first place. So he took a deep breath and said the only thing that felt true. "I don't know what the right answer is," he admitted. "I don't know if I'll ever forgive you. But I do know that this isn't just about you and me. It's bigger than that." He looked out at the audience, at the people who had come here to learn, to understand, to challenge themselves. What matters isn't just what Karen does next. It's what we all do next. A murmur spread through the crowd. People nodded, whispering to each other. Karen swallowed hard, then nodded. "You're right." And for the first time, Marcus believed that maybe, just maybe, she actually meant it. As the discussion wrapped up and people began to leave, Marcus and his mother stayed seated for a moment, letting everything sink in. "Proud of you," his mother said quietly. Marcus didn't respond right away. He just exhaled, feeling a weight lift from his chest. Maybe he wasn't sure what the future held. Maybe he didn't know if Karen would truly change. But he did know one thing. He wasn't alone in this. And that was enough.